If you wanted to, thank you, Marianne. So the session will be recorded. We'll share it with you afterwards. If you wanted to look at it again, you are very welcome to do so. Let me just use one of my and let go of all of my buttons at the top. So from insight to impact, today is all about real relationship case studies using the Century Matrix and maybe a little bit of my own personal sharing. I was working with children with learning and development difficulties, lots of children with autism and ADHD. And only when I made the shift from working with children to adults did a whole new world open up for me. I'm particularly fond of the whole relationship dynamic because it's definitely changed my life. When I started to work with adults, there was a different level of understanding for my lovely husband, who I'm still married to 35 years later. And I'm confident to say if I haven't started to do this work, I probably would not have been married to him anymore. So, to a certain extent, it saved my marriage, but it's also helped me to understand the choices that I've been making over the years. So, relationships is something that's absolutely really, really close to my heart. And then, already just in advance, a thank you to Kaylee Alberts, Madre Frankel, and Stephanie Warner, who's going to share their stories on the Century Matrix and the case studies around relationships. As usual, let's just do some connections in the chat box. I would love to hear where you are all from. I'm just going to open the chat box. And while Marianne is still letting in people that's sitting in at the last minute, where are you from, Lorna? Okay, let me just see. Where's everyone from? Quebec, Canada, Virginia, well done, Boston, Johannesburg. Stephanie, yeah, were you from California? Hermana, South Africa. Victoria, BC, UK. That's really, really awesome. Thanks to let us know where you are. Cape Town, DC in the US, Sasolburg, Oxford in the UK, Durban, UK, Johannesburg, Durban, very cold Pretoria, George. Okay, great. Elam, South Africa. Oh, we even have someone from Azerfontein. We hope the weather is good on that side. Thank you for telling us where you are from. That's always really, really great to see. Let me just close my participant box so that we can see. Awesome. Great. So it's lovely to hear where you are from. And then some of you, what's your background? Who are you? What type of industry are you in? I am identifying a lot of occupational therapists or OT, but who are the other people on our course? Coaches, clinical social worker. Awesome. Thank you, Laura. OTs, who's the other people? Would love to hear who you are. If you could just pop in the chat box where you are from and who you are. Psychologist, Janelle, thank you so much. OT working with children, special needs OT. Psych OT, Century Food Specialist. Hello, Faye. Always good to see you. Hello, Melandi, another OT. Awesome. Educational psychologist, Linda. Nice to see you, Linda. Lots of old faces, new faces. Great stuff. Pastoral narrative therapist, Christelle. That's awesome. Okay, I'm a lead access auditor specializing in neurodiversity. That's Becky. Thank you, Becky. Awesome. That really helps to know who you are. Psych Ed in Namibia. Brilliant. It's lovely because we always draw quite a wide range of people, which is really awesome. That we love that. Anyone new to Century Intelligence? Thank you. There's still some information coming in. Are there anyone in our call tonight that hasn't been exposed to any of our work before? Lisa? Yes, you haven't. Let me just see. Anyone else? I always do context and just positioning of the material before we start, but it's always nice to know. So Lisa might be the only one. Okay. All right. Great stuff. First time attending, Chandra. Awesome. You're very welcome. Okay, good. Just carefully to let you know, we will be putting a poll up for CPD purposes because we can't necessarily always read your screen name and you are not included in the email as part of the Zoom call. So just later in the call, we will put a poll up. Please just add your name and your CPD number to it because obviously we have applied for CPD points, so you will get your CPD point as based on that. Thank you for housekeeping. Keep yourself muted. That kind of goes without saying. We are in a meeting format, not a webinar format, which is nice. We can see your faces. There's a little bit of activity, which we really do like and enjoy. But yeah, just if you can remember to keep yourself muted. And please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box. Marianne will be managing the chat box. So if there's anything that you feel you want to ask right throughout or you wanted to know, please don't wait. Pop it in the chat box. Right at the end, we do have time for Q&A. Then we usually also loop back to those questions in the chat box. The recording will be shared afterwards with you, so you are welcome to that. If you hear a funny noise, it's my dog sitting below here, but I think Zoom are quite good in filtering out noises, but he's following me. He's quite old, but he's following me everywhere. Okay, so 3 things that we're going to do. I'm going to give you context and framework. Then we'll move into the case studies, and the last little bit will just do closure and Q&A. So just let's talk about the relationship context. I want to share this with you, which is really, really interesting. Since I've put the Century Matrix together as a tool, and remember that was post my PhD, it was a need that I've just really identified going through my PhD, and data collection was a nightmare. And the Century Matrix was birthed from then. And over the years, I think literally from 2005 with our first version until now, we are consistently drawing from the data of the questionnaire, from completed Century Matrix questionnaires. And the data is quite clear. There's about 30% of our data, and we're talking about different sets, but probably close to about 8,000 data sets, 8,000 entries. There's about 30% of those people are all low threshold, so highly sensory sensitive or sensory sensitivity. The other top 30% have got sensation seeking, high threshold tendencies, with 40% of people kind of more in the neutral space. So these two ends of it, low threshold 30%, high threshold 30%, and then medium threshold is 40%. And I think what has been interesting for me over the years is when you start to connect these groups of people together on a continuum, it becomes really, really interesting to understand why do one person have one particular behavior and another person has exactly the opposite behavior. So seeking and avoiding in a conjunction for relationship is a really, really powerful and I think a very unconscious process that we don't necessarily consider. Then I've just checked some more data. You know, research is always important. There's a recent study, it was published last year, looking at marital conflict and how that spills over into parenting. And we know that's obviously true, but this study looked at, and the link is there, so you will be able to pick it up in the recording afterwards. The parent sensory processing sensitivity, so those with low threshold moderated how conflict between partners were carrying over into next day parenting. And sensitive parents felt the ripple effects a lot more, which also makes sense to how we understand and know how these thresholds present. There was another study on relationship satisfaction. Again, highly sensitive people, your sensory processing group was an independent risk factor for lower romantic relationship satisfaction, acting through emotional reactivity and how conflict gets handled. So I think there's more than enough studies also, and I'm just quoting you the recent ones. There have been studies all along to show how we can use sensory processing as a predictor or a risk factor on how people manage their relationships. For those of you who don't know, I started Sensory Intelligence working with parenting workshops. So the whole parenting slice, how do we parent, why do we parent, how do we approach parenting, was literally the entry for me into the work with adults many, many years ago. So in other words, there's a meaningful share of couples and families that are navigating sensory processing differences, but not necessarily having the language for it. And I think this is the key thing here. Sensory processing brings a lens to understanding behavior and understanding conflict within relationships. And it's got such a powerful capacity to help us to let go of labeling and judgment and be more compassionate. So again, I've said this before, I'm just going to go through it again. Most models miss, or they often look at mindset, behavior, and performance, but the reality is underneath all of human functioning is sensory processing, but it is the invisible system shaping people's emotion, their attention, and their behavior. How do we feel, our habits, our performance, our coping? A lot of our quirky behaviors are often derived from our sensory needs and our sensory thresholds, and that really does help. So, sensory intelligence really aims here to make the invisible more visible, and it underpins the core of nervous system overload and regulation, which is really important for us to remember. So going to our image, all of you must be familiar with this image by now, but really important. All of us have seven sensory systems that responds to the environment based on your threshold type. And remember, you can have different threshold across different systems. Looking at just at auditory, who are the person who turns up the volume to listen to music, your high threshold for auditory versus your low threshold might be turning the volume down because they are actually feeling overwhelmed. But these seven systems in synergy or in conjunction will determine how regulated we are, how focused or how resourced we are feeling to manage the day-to-day demands that we have. And just remember, the brain is magical and really fundamental here. The brain first sends because information enters the brain at the bottom, then it feels, and then it thinks. So sensory input starts with nervous system processing. And there's a lot of talk everywhere in social media at the moment around nervous system regulation. And I'm really grateful about that because, yes, we are considering and looking at behavior and not necessarily looking at it from a cognitive lens, an executive brain lens, but looking at it from a sensory lens, which is your primitive brain lens. So nervous system processing is going to produce your regulation state, which is really tapping into the limbic system and the emotional areas of the brain, which then results in behavior and performance. So if we change the input, which is on a sensory level, we can shift the state, which is cognitive, how we think. So we know that by actually influencing the sensory environment through what is happening and what is coming into the brain, we can literally deviate or impact how the brain is going to think and reason and then perform ultimately. So remember, nervous system processing is first and foremost very primitive. The regulation state happens as information move up from the primitive brain into the middle of the brain in the limbic structures and then up to the cortex for ultimate thinking and reasoning. We are very adamant about utilizing the neuroscience framework as a guideline or as a framework or as a reference point for everything that we teach and that we use in sensory intelligence. Okay. Then obviously the sensory matrix, which is what we are going to start to move into. The assessment that I've designed starting, the first version was designed in 2005. We are at version 4 now, so it's been running through various updates. There have been a lot of research in the process as well, and I guess the research in this will continue until the day that, I don't know, maybe 2040. Madra and I were talking about 2040 or 2030. Madra, I hope it's not 2040, but who knows, it might. But that's my commitment. I keep on, being time invested into the research behind it all. So I think the important thing is what the matrix has pinned down is what people didn't necessarily always knew about themselves. And the biggest feedback that we've been getting from this tool from literally 25 years ago is now suddenly I understand myself better. Or I always thought there was something wrong with me. Now I know this is just how my brain is wired and how do I respond to my environment. So it's been enormously empowering for clients, and which is what our three practitioners will also share with you. It maps your unique sensory identity through your 7 systems. One could be high, one could be low, one could be medium. We could also have fluctuations. Then it's going to pinpoint your regulation risk, as well as the best type of strategies that you should be applied. And really, for me, it's if you know your senses, you can literally change your life. Okay. So, Marianne, this is just a call for us to launch the poll. Marianne is just going to put the poll on the screen. So please just add your name. And I think there's just 2 questions, your name and your CPD points, because that's just going to help us to prepare when we actually do your CPD after the session. So while you complete and go on of that, I'm just going to move forward to our next slide. I'm going to wait for you just to do that before I'm going to hand over to Kaylee. So Marianne, you can just give me an idea. I think there's 58 people on the call. Not all of you obviously are going to complete the poll for CPD purposes. But if you haven't done so, please get to that ASAP. And then I'm going to hand over to Kaylee Albert. She's an occupational therapist. She has done our course, Kelly, I don't know when, ages ago, and she's also one of our licensed sensory intelligence practitioners. So, Kelly, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Anna Marie. I was also trying to think of when it was, I think around 2020, somewhere there. So quite a few years ago. Yeah, I'm excited to share one of the case studies that recently, it was a few months ago actually. Maybe just to give everyone a little bit of context. So I work in an inpatient facility. I'm an occupational therapist, and I work with adults and teenagers. And in this context, it was an adult I was working with who was actually part of the general program, meaning it was just psychiatry. So I work with mental health. So first, in terms of a little bit of background, so the relationship we're going to look at in this case study is about a married couple, but I just need to give you a little bit of background for that to make sense. So the patient that was referred to me, she's a 45-year-old female, but her main reason actually for the sensory referral was struggling with low mood, depressed mood as a result of grief. So she didn't have any children. She lost her boy, her son. I think she was with me in the Feb or March of this year. So it was a very new, very recent loss, where it was the end of last year where she lost her son who was ill. She was also an online teacher, and she was married, living here in South Africa. And something new that came up, and I definitely see the value in obviously doing history, was that she was an ex-addict. She was previously an addict and has now been 6 years sober. So just at the bottom of those slides, I just mentioned there because I think it's very important to know what substances were used in terms of a stimulant or a depressant, because it massively influences the sensory system. So she previously was using cocaine and meth, and significantly influenced her relationship with her partner. So we actually first dived into her history to understand, which kind of caught up to understanding her current grief and loss. So part of the discussion first arose that she was really struggling with her husband, and it first came across that the grief was obviously the main factor that was causing a lot of challenges in their relationship. And then through chatting further, she told me, no, so she's actually also been married for 6 years. And when she met her husband, they met using together. So they both met, they were both addicts. And she spoke of her life when she was an addict vastly differently to where she is now. So when she was an addict, she was incredibly social, very outgoing, always around busy, social, vibey places. And interesting is that's how her husband met her in that like context, that frame of mind. So that's what he saw of her. That's why I wrote at the bottom there, sensory seeker, but on face value. But yet, if you see once chatting to her, and now obviously being sober for 6 years, very, very different picture that you actually see. We can actually jump slides, Anna Marie, to the next one. So just I just put this for context for maybe people who haven't worked in addiction facilities or with substance users, just for a greater understanding. So the use of stimulants in her case, which was meth and cocaine, temporarily changed how she experienced sensory input. So for her, previously, when she was using, the substances allowed her to function in environments that were actually previously overwhelming for her, meaning it very much increased her confidence, reduced her awareness when she was uncomfortable in an environment. I've seen with a lot of the addicts, the understanding, or I actually want to say the lack of understanding of how it numbs or shuts down your nervous system, substances now, and how actually not even being conscious of their sensory needs is just as much of a problem as coming off the substance, actually, which has been very interesting to see and understand. So for her, she has actually now, in the last 6 years, her husband has actually started to almost, he said, when we did the exit session, so this is how it came up, we did the exit session and he said, I've been married to a different person these last 6 years. It's a completely different lady. My wife is so different. And he accounted it all to grief, or he accounted a significant portion in the last year to the grief and obviously the very challenging route that they went through. And sitting in our session, we really had to look at the role of substances in influencing her appearing like sensory-seeking behavior. So there at the bottom, when I said they're now sober, the husband thought he'd married someone, or it came across like she was social, outgoing, energetic, very spontaneous. So you can hear all the, I want to say, sensory-seeking characteristics coming through. And now, since becoming sober, now completely presents differently as sensory sensitive. So they're withdrawn, wanting to be more by herself, not liking crowds, almost like a quieter, more grounded energy, not spontaneous, preferring a plan. So you can hear all the sensory sensitive and some sensory avoiding characteristics. A big aspect we needed to discuss was how, because she was in such a significant depressed space, how that even lowered her sensory threshold even more. So yes, she was sensory sensitive, but for this time period, she was even, I almost want to say, lower threshold. So she was in an even more sensitive area in terms of getting overwhelmed even quicker. So it presented almost as an even greater extreme, if that makes sense. We can jump to the next slide, Anna-Marie. This, I just thought, is a really helpful analogy of understanding the role substances play in this filter and taking this mask off, taking this, in this case, you're going to use sunglasses off, how it affects the change in sensory behavior. So you can maybe just have a look at that slide, and it just mentions if you had to spend many years wearing sunglasses, but now you're not realizing it. So this is like the filter on top of your eyes. And the world seems very comfortable while you have this filter on. Suddenly, you end up taking this filter off, these sunglasses off, and you notice, sure, sunlight makes my eyes really, really painful. It's really bright. I'm struggling. But actually, the sun has not suddenly become brighter. You're just suddenly experiencing without the filter on, without your sunglasses on. And the filter has just in the past allowed you to become accustomed to the brightness of light. So this is how I often use it to explain it to substance users, that the drugs, whatever substance you're on, definitely looking at if it's a stimulant or depressant, because it'll work differently, but how it temporarily alters how your brain processes sensory information. So in recovery, the nervous system is no longer filtering these substances. The substances previously used to help you cope in loud, busy, social environments. Now, with that being removed, it appears like, and I actually wrote there, the person hasn't become weak. That's how maybe it looks like, shucks, they've changed. They've changed into someone else, but rather the underlying sensory identity has actually just become more visible with the substance now being removed. And so that is why in this case with this couple, he actually needed to get to know a whole new, I want to say wife, a whole new lady after she was now sober. We can jump to the next slide. So in terms of intervention and outcome for her, so it was both working with her and then with the husband. For her, the main thing was actually increasing her awareness with regard to how does she process sensory information? How has it shifted over the years from being a substance user to now being sober? And how has it significantly changed in terms of her registering of sensory information? For her, helping her understand the impact and the role grief had played for her in terms of the negative emotions, lowering her threshold so she appeared a bit more sensory avoiding in the quite recent time. So we looked at what are her sensory needs in terms of, so after doing the sensory profile, after doing the sensory matrix, after we did it together, we went through, okay, so looking at your scoring, what are your needs? For you to function and be supported in the best way, what do you need? And obviously this is not what her husband understood or what he knew of her. And some of the things in terms of her needing personal space, which actually in this case turned to isolation, which was not necessarily a good thing. It was very much explaining why some of her sensory needs were there in the first place and just validating it. That was a big thing for her. There was a lot of guilt feelings around her mood and her behavior after the grief she had experienced. So a lot of it was just validating why it makes sense she'd wanted to isolate, why she came across as even more sensory sensitive. So that played a big role in the sessions. And then I actually approached her, and while we were chatting through her sensory matrix, I often bring it in with its couples or family. She mentioned her husband a few times. And when she mentioned my husband's said I'm different over the last few years since I'm sober, I first started prompting and asking, okay, how is your husband? Is he similar in terms of his auditory threshold? Is he quite different to you? Can he tolerate more? Can he tolerate less? Until she starts telling me, oh no, he's a biker. And she explains how socially he is, super sensory seeking, thrill, adrenaline seeking. So now obviously you can hear this picture starting to get clearer and clearer. So I asked her that before you get discharged, what if he comes in? What if we do a joint session, more just for empathy to be developed from the husband's side, to understand the space you're in, how your relationship has changed, but how he can support you going forward, specifically in this grief time period, but from a big aspect of how can you support each other's sensory needs, because you are quite different in terms of what your needs are. He was a very social, chatty, no filter type of guy. It was actually the most entertaining session ever. I melted in my seat a few times because some of the things he said, but it was actually a breath of fresh air. But explaining it to him, he was like, oh my word, yes, this makes so much sense. I'm not crazy. Like, my wife isn't just completely changed. This makes sense when you're talking about us becoming sober, how I met her when we were using. And I think because they were so polar opposite in their sensory needs, him being seeking in almost every sensory system. So we actually had to speak him through a lot of his needs, and how they cannot satisfy each other's sensory needs, that where they differ, or in certain areas where they differ, he would need to go get some of those needs satisfied with friends, with high impact sport, with some adrenaline activities, and she would need to say no to social things and sometimes be in her own quiet space. So creating that understanding or discussing that between them was a big one. So educating him, explaining the role of substances, explaining the role grief then had in this whole setup, similar to how I explained it to her. And then we chatted quite a bit about unsupported sensory needs. I always explain the match versus mismatch. So what are your needs, and is your environment supporting it? And he was trying to drag her the whole time into these seeking environments, and then wondering why she wasn't keen to be involved and was just isolating more and more. So I must say, initially, the husband was very cautious. He was quite wary, and I think he thought I was a little bit crazy, to be honest, with all these things I was coming up with. But I must say, the more I explained it and the more the wife kind of jumped on board with me, I could see he was starting to understand and kind of could see the direction we were coming from. But especially because we included him in what were his sensory needs, how is it also affecting him? So I think because we came from both perspectives, that's really helped. And I think I was explaining the sensory bucket to him. Oh, you can actually jump to the next one, Anna Marie. So
Now you've got
obviously,
one more minute, Kaylee. Kaylee
no
did say I
problem.
can rush her along. She said she could
Yeah,
talk forever.
I can
You've
talk a
got one
lot.
more minute.
So this, I explained this concept to them as a couple, the sensory bucket. So obviously the overflowing on the left is sensory overload. The far right is a low or empty bucket, which contributes to depression. And the session ended with they are going to stick this on the fridge and they are going to check in with each other on a daily occasion as to how are their buckets looking, in terms of is she overwhelmed, is he understimulated, and them actually taking responsibility for their own sensory needs. That was a major one, that they don't need to fulfill each other's bucket. And the end pretty much of that session was actually speaking about the strengths of having different sensory needs and that they can actually complement each other. Him kind of bringing her out of her sensitive avoiding behavior, getting her exposed to some things, and her grounding him to a large extent, which I think gave such a positive dynamic on such different needs. So I really came from a very positive perspective, and I must say I think they walked out feeling a lot more empowered, and I really think they had a better understanding of each other. So it almost became more of a marriage counseling, couples counseling session, but just validating the tough time and the grief in between it all. Sorry, I
Great.
spoke very fast, but I hope that made sense.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much, Kaylee. And I think that's what we often see, these opposing ends. How does that play out and how does it work? And I think just providing the framework and the narrative for people to understand, so it's massively empowered. So thank you so much for that contribution. That's really, really great. It would be interesting to see what's going on in their life now. So follow up with them and let us know. Brilliant. Thank you, Kaylee. Madre, up to you now. So Madre is also an occupational therapist. She's done our course, Madra, I think many, many years ago, and she's one of our practitioners. Madra, you must just unmute
I think
yourself.
2012.
2012. Oh my gosh.
Mm,
Really,
19.
that's when we started. That is very, very long ago. You are right. We started, I think, in 2012. That was one of our first courses, still face to
Yeah,
face.
yeah, yeah,
Brilliant,
yeah. Yeah.
Madra. Yeah, so over to you. So Madra is going to just share, I think, a different bit of case study. So I can't wait for your sharing, Madra. So go ahead.
Okay, so mine is not scientific at all. I'm gonna shoot from the hip and tell you what it is like trying to be an occupational therapist, wife, mother, running a practice, being involved at school, trying to have friends, all of this while being a root. So sometimes I just realize that it's a full-time job being a root and trying to juggle all of this, but it is possible. And the other nice thing for me is really being able to have empathy with my clients when they have this aha moment when we do the profile, but then also feeling super blessed that I was able to do the sensory profile when I was 25 years old. I think I was 25 at that stage, and getting to know myself better, understanding myself better, and how I go into relationships. So, when I did the profile or the course with Annemarie in 2012, it was just after I got married to leave. My one sister had a head injury and my dad passed away. All of this happened at once. So I was able to gain 20 kilograms in about 3 months, I think it was. So it was really low. It was very low. And I, by accident, did the course with Annemarie, and the aha moment was just amazing. So I think when I look at my life, my first thing obviously is to try and have a balanced life with my children. I've got three girls who really like to scream and shout. They really enjoy using their voices. And the one is becoming a teenager now, which is giving it a whole new dynamic in our house. Two daughters are leave, one is a trunk. Sport plays a very big role in our life. My husband is a complete leave. I started a practice as a pediatric therapist, realized that wouldn't work, and now going into a day trying to balance all of that. Now, I couldn't ask for a better example than what happened in the vehicle this morning. I had to collect one of my kids from hockey before school. And when she got into the car, the one who is becoming a teenager now, and I went, okay, someone just exercise. So I said, please remember there is a roll-on in your school bag, one in your hockey bag, and you can look in the cabin, there's one there as well, obviously expressing my needs. And about 3 months ago, Checkers didn't deliver the roll-on that I wanted, the one that I've been using for years. They delivered this blue one here. And when I first smelled it, I was like, oh, it smells so fresh. So I bought everyone this. This is all over. And when I said, just remember the deodorant is everywhere, she went, Mom, please just never buy the blue one again. I smell like I just got out of the washing machine. And I immediately realized, had I not known the profiles, I would have gone, there's so many kids out there who would have done anything to have roll-on. You've got 3 roll-ons everywhere and you choose not to use this one, but instead going, wait, maybe that's why my teenager is acting out at times. It could be that flippin' blue roll-on. We need to change it to a scent that she actually likes. It was just there's one way to manage this teenager in our house in a very practical way. So yes, it's the managing the kids and knowing exactly where they are in terms of their sensory systems. It's knowing when the one gets into the car, I go, here's something to eat, because then I know I can actually have a conversation because I can help her to regulate when she gets back from school. So knowing the one needs to eat in order to be a lacquer person, knowing that I need to look at this one's sports schedule because it might be too much for her. So really being with it with the children, looking at what do I pack into their lunch boxes. And yes, it's 3 girls, each one with their own specific lunch box. But I know it's beneficial for me as a root because they will regulate with their eating system, being able to concentrate better, being able to tolerate the interaction in our house, and yes, helping with regulation overall. Um, uh, yeah, so that's the kids part. My husband, yeah, I think if we look at
Is it
my
okay?
sensory,
Can I
that's
put it
good,
up?
thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
so also knowing that where, um, with my own system, I need to be very careful, and it's obviously my auditory system and tactile. Again, having 3 girls who is all over you all the time and the screaming. So how do I manage that throughout the day? What do I do to, when I get them in the afternoons from school, not being a screaming mother because I'm completely in overload? And using my taste, which is my best one, to regulate before I get them, regulate during the day. Also knowing that, yes, the two systems that my husband and myself can use to our benefit is movement and taste. So really putting more, my husband makes the food, he puts more focus into what we eat, the seasoning that we're using. Um, and yes, if there's an activity that we can do, if there's time to do something together, most likely going to do something like playing padel, going for a walk with the dogs, or something like that. As an occupational therapist, the move from being a pediatric therapist to doing adults, and also I've tried to explain that to some of my clients. They've asked me, why do I always walk in front of them and not greet everyone very familiarly? And I said, well, this is my way to keep my space between myself and you, and also to see what your body's reaction is when you meet me. So I've got this whole thing of how I position myself so that the clients don't feel that they need to come in for a hug, because I really don't want them to come in for a hug. Um, and also the way in which I schedule my clients. I try to do 2 clients in the office. The hospital is right next to my office. So I can do a short jog to the hospital, see some clients there, use the lift, use the stairs there, not the lift. The hospital clients don't speak as much as the office clients. So running back to the office, grabbing a coffee on the way, being ready for the next clients, then scheduling home visits to use that time on the road, radio down, really regulating while on the road as well. Um, so even putting time and focus into scheduling of a day, knowing what kind of clients you're going to see through the day, how much should be physical, where do you position your physical clients versus your psych clients so that you are fresh and not feeling exhausted for the next session. Yes, I think when you listen to me, you might go, hmm, hmm. And yes, some of my clients have asked me if I'm not on the spectrum of some sort. And I said, call it what you may. I know what I need. I know what I need in order to survive, in order to do my work, then arrive for a parent meeting at school, still looking as if everything is in control, and then coming home trying to be a wife. So just juggling this whole juggle and not being exhausted all the time. I think it's also nice when you really have good friends and they know you and they know your needs. So many of my friends, most of my friends know that they can come for their yearly hug when it's my birthday, but otherwise I don't know why people are hanging on each other the whole time. So everyone knows me as the high five person, but I like the high fives more than coming in for some awkward hug here and there. Um, I think it's also important to know your colleagues and if there's someone working with you, what their profiles look like. Again, when you schedule clients for them, again, when you look at the way in which they schedule their day in order to give them advice, because not everyone that works with you might have done the sensory matrix and know their sensory system that well, but also to have that awareness and looking at your colleagues, seeing I think we need to intervene here, look at your schedule, look at the way in which we schedule clients for you, and have some admin time maybe scheduled in the middle somewhere. So that awareness of the people around you. And then, yes, taking the time out that you do have, using weekends optimally. Um, Again, with the juggle, having kids, having to do work admin, but having some downtime just to regulate with what your system really needs. Um, yeah. So is there another slide, Maria?
Nope.
Okay, that's the last one. So yeah, I think if I look at myself from the outside, I would say, "Phew, that's very intense." Um, and I think I make it sound worse than what it is. But remember now, my sensory system has become a lifestyle for me. It's not just knowledge and book knowledge anymore. It's a way of living. And I think that is the message that I would like to bring over is this is a lifestyle. The better you know your own system, the more you are mindful in your day-to-day living and actually going, oh, that is so fresh. Or when your husband arrives, your leave husband arrives with cookies and cream toilet spray to go, mm-mm, mm-mm, that can go to your office. It's not going to be in our house. To absolutely voice it and let everyone understand there's a reason. If you want the other side of mommy to come out, let's scream and shout a little bit more or take it outdoors. But also, I think the tricky part is not to be selfish in your sensory system, but to look at everyone in your house and in ways in which you can encourage them to regulate in a way that doesn't upset the rest of the house.
Thank you so much, Mardra. I think when I spoke to Mardra, I've met Mardra, I had coffee with Mardra quite a few months back, and then she said, "Well, if you anytime want to someone to have a good case study, then use me as a case study because I'm a good one." So, Mardra, thank you for sharing that. I just want to reiterate that's what we always do. I think was my journey in learning the whole sensory intelligence framework, and that's how we always position our training. First, do it on yourself, make it your own. What does it mean for you as a person? And then, if it changed your life, because it does, and it's all about insight, and then, aligning life experience to actually be a nicer person. And be more regulated because if you are, everyone in your home is going to benefit, including yourself. So I think this is again that key message: understanding, compassion, acceptance, and then yes, a little bit of negotiation within a relationship to actually look at everyone's needs and to actually get the best output. So thanks, Madre, for that. That's really awesome. And thanks for being brave to share your story. There's many, 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 many more of those. So thanks. Awesome. Thank you so much. Stephanie, you are the last one for feedback on your client. So shoot. I'm sure we're still fine with time, so you can just go ahead and then tell us about your
Okay. And
client.
I
Thanks,
started a
Stephanie.
timer here so I can monitor how I'm going. So hi, I'm Stephanie. I work in a non-clinical setting. I've started a consultancy where primarily women come to learn more about their sensory processing system, and then we use that information to see how we can make their work performance better, their enjoyment at work better, because the whole goal for me is to prevent women from burning out and stay in these fields that we need them in and that they want to be in, and managing all the other things they have to in their life, very much like what Madre was just saying. So my client, we're going to refer to them as C and K. They are a couple in their mid 30s. They've been together for 10 years. They're monogamous, not married, no kids, and they do have one clingy dog. And I'll give you a cliffhanger because this becomes very important later in our intervention plan. The reason for the consultation is C actually came to me initially. She had self-identified as somebody who was a sensory avoidant, and she wanted to learn more about her system. And then after me and her worked together, she's like, my partner absolutely needs to do this. And then I actually found that this became a pattern with other clients that I had. And then I started offering couple sessions as one of my services. So I have a lot to give C for opening up this avenue for me. And she self-identified that there was this sensory mismatch happening in her household. She felt that her and her partner were very different. They had very different needs in the house. And then she was also concerned because she was watching Kay, her partner, slowly get more and more stressed at work and be unable to handle it. And she wasn't sure how to help. So our goals, we had many, many goals, but we pretty much were able to put them into needing increased cohesion by reframing sensory mismatch as difference, not rejection, because that was a really big goal for them, as they were misinterpreting a lot of the interactions that they were having in the house that were really just a sensory mismatch problem. And we also wanted to build shared tools that create we-ness without erasing either partner's individual needs. I think Kaylee spoke on this a bit with her couple, how the more sensory seeking one needed to have more individual activities and permission to go have those individual activities to fill their sensory buckets up. And knowing that it didn't comment anything on the relationship. It was purely, this is the person's sensory needs and this is the best way to get them filled. And you can move on to the next slide. So they both took the sensory matrix, and their scores are interesting. I need to come up with a way to like mirror them on or lay them on top of each other, because you can really see C is a sensory avoidant, and her biggest or her lowest score is visual, whereas K has a high visual or high auditory. I'm sorry, did I say visual? Her lowest was auditory, but K's one of the highest was auditory, and that became a big point of conflict in their relationship. C is a musician. She has a very good ear for sound, and K could have earphones on in another room, and C can still hear the music coming through the earphones, and it would drive her absolutely crazy, and it was creating this a lot of conflict. Kay felt like they're being really nitpicked at. And so kind of creating this a negotiation of how sound will be handled in the household was one of the interventions we used. And then you can see on K's score, the lowest score is -7 for touch, whereas C is more of a trunk for touch and actually expressed that she really enjoys like tactile feelings. She really enjoys people being in her personal bubble. She really enjoys just the close company of other people, whereas K did not, like, could only tolerate certain amounts of cuddling, does not want people in the personal bubble. So very different. And then you also have K had this multi sensory fluctuating score, whereas whereas C is more of a trunk for multisensory. And this was also a point of conflict and more concern on C's part for K, because K would crash. K would come home from work, or K would come home from going out to a concert and then going out for drinks after the concert, and socializing with people, and then come home and just completely crash, or the next day completely crash, where she could not wake Kay up. And this was a concern for C, because C was adding a lot of meaning, like, oh, Kay must be very depressed, or oh, Kay isn't managing stress well. Does Kay need a new job? And interpreting this crash that's happening, because Kay was not aware. Kay didn't understand this fluctuating of energy that happens for her throughout the day. So talking about this, talking about the management of energy, the management of sound, and negotiations of touch in the relationship, uh, when we were able to see these scores and unpack them, and unpack what they meant for the unit, the couple as a unit, we took a lot of the stigma away. We took a lot of the assigned meaning that they each were doing. And as you'll see, and I think it's 2 slides, we talk about interventions. We use scripts for them to be able to have just a few words that they can share with each other. So it conveys a greater meaning, like, I'm overloaded, or my bucket's full. I love the bucket analogy. I use that same kind of visual with them. And that became like a shared language that they were able to use to communicate what they were either seeing in their partner or experiencing themselves, to talk about these different scores that are quite mismatched. You could go to the next slide. A big thing too, I've always liked to do this. I have a social work background, and there's a big push on what are the strengths in this relationship. And we spent a tremendous amount of time talking about strengths for them, because Kay does have a much more sensory seeking nature, and C had shared stories about them going on weekend trips, and Kay is constantly, let's go do this, let's go do this, let's go do the next thing, and constantly moving them throughout the day. And C would not have otherwise done that on her own. If she had planned the itinerary, there would not have been these opportunities for really wonderful, vivid memories to be formed together. But the problem was they weren't then baking the energy crash, really, that they both experience into the agenda. And so just appreciating how much Kay does bring that life and joy into their life through this seeking of new experiences, felt really validating to Kay, because I think that she felt very rejected sometimes by C not wanting to go along with all of these fun, exciting plans that she had. And then on the other hand, C likes consistency. She's a root. And because she does like a calmer environment, she doesn't add to Kay's sensory overload. So in that way, they're a very good match, because Kay doesn't really do a very good job of managing her sensory environment yet. She is getting better. And so C, they've probably been able to stay together despite this mismatch and other things, because C does provide that lack of stimulation and that down regulation opportunities. And then their matrix scores do align on movement, which they have figured out kind of on their own through doing hikes together, very often. However, Kay likes to try to get C to go to her workout classes with her. And we did have to say, that's probably not a good idea. You need to let her go. Just focus on the activities that are good for both of your sensory systems together. In terms of challenges, we discussed the auditory mismatch, the touch mismatch, and again, the energy mismatch. Kay's needs change throughout the day. They shared about that and how what energizes Kay drains C, and reframing that as just a sensory need rather than rejection. You can move on. So our 4 areas of intervention, we focused on home, communication, connection, and intimacy. For the sake of time, I will just zoom through these a little bit. So home, they each actually have their own bedrooms and own office spaces, and just really encouraging them to treat those as energizing or retreat spaces. They started having quiet hours in the house, so that C didn't have to ask Kay to put headphones on because it felt very parental in a way. They have downtime after work, which is really good for them. And then C really needs time to raise her energy slower. Whereas K wants lights on, coffee, music on right in the morning, and that's really hard on C. And so understanding that they kind of need to treat their mornings differently and find ways to come together. Communication. So we talked a lot about what would be community encouraging to C or K, how they can speak kindly to each other and encourage these aspects of their personalities and honor them. And so explaining that K can encourage C by honoring her need for like predictability, advanced planning, using the headphones without being asked. C can encourage K by noticing when she's having fluctuations and not really assigning meaning, like it has something to do with me, but just voicing that, I'm seeing this energy fluctuation. And then C also doing activities that are pushing herself outside of her comfort zone for the sake of the relationship, because it is important to be doing things that our partners also enjoy. And so C, I think, need a little bit more encouragement to do that for K, and then K understanding that C will now need downtime afterwards. And then the conflict, low stim environments as much as possible. They were already kind of doing that, but just reiterating that. And then the use of scripts, which I talked about earlier, has been really great for them because they can just say a quick little thing when they're overloaded and the meaning's embedded. And then for connection, active dates, like we talked about, touch. There was this whole thing that they were sharing with me about C wants to cuddle on the couch for an extended period of time, but then C falls asleep and K gets trapped. I think every human on this planet has experienced some version of this. And so just explaining to C that K needs to physically get up and do her own regulation after a cuddle session. And so usually what that looks like is she goes and lays flat on the ground. And then social calendar, solo pursuits for Kay, like we talked about. And then so intimacy, this one is a new one. It's not covered during the sensory intelligence course. But something we did talk about is I see that it's almost 10. Do you want me to continue?
I think that's, Stephanie, I know we are running out of time, but please just touch on it briefly.
Okay,
It is very,
of
very
course.
powerful and something that I've also had many, many discussions with couples over the past, but it's a very unmapped, or let's say under investigated area, how sensory
Yeah,
processing impacts intimacy. It's quite real and we see it a
yeah,
lot, but I haven't seen much research on it. But I would love
yeah.
to have your opinion. If people need to hop off the call, please feel free to go. But we'll just wrap that up because I do think it's really, really important. And I'll just close with one slide after that. But please go ahead. Just 1 or 2 more
Yeah.
minutes about that. Those of you who want to go, please feel free to hop off the call.
Okay.
Thanks,
So
Stephanie.
this couple is not having intimacy right now, and that was a challenge for them. C felt more distressed by it than K did because C does have that higher need for touch. And I think she was doing the most of the misinterpreting of these interactions. K is going through a really stressful time in her life. So what we decided is that based on the profiles is if intimacy is to happen, it needs to happen earlier in the day for both of them because they both get super overloaded by the end of the day and just crash. And they agreed that they feel like that would work. But C also needs a little bit of that wake up time before. So their idea is that C can have a little bit of time to wake up, slow wake up, coffee, whatever she needs to do. K needs to do some movement activities so that she can front load that regulation before any kind of touch happens. Um, and then ongoing communication by K about her energy levels, because C is interpreting her lack of initiation or lack of showing interest as rejection, but really it's sensory overload because of her job. There's a lot more I'm not able to go into. She does a lot of context switching in her day, and she just doesn't have a lot of energy at the end of the day. And when I really challenge them on what she feels like is a barrier to intimacy, is they shared their dog is so clingy, and the dog is so clingy to Kay, particularly. The dog is constantly touching Kay at all times. This little dog is on top of Kay, is at her feet, is licking her. She can't lay in a bed or a couch without the dog on top of her. And that creates a lot of overstimulation, and she doesn't like it. It's just the dog is really attached to her. Um, and C kind of rolled her eyes at this being the reason for lack of intimacy, but I challenged them on it. Like, hire a dog trainer, get this figured out, because clearly this is draining your social battery. And so it sounds really silly, but by 1 week later, they had a dog trainer in their house. We had a follow-up session, and they're like, oh, we have to go actually because the dog trainer's coming. And I'm like, okay, good. I'm glad that this is like high on your priority list of things to resolve. And so we'll see if the dog really is the problem. Um, I envision that it's a lot of sensory stuff that's going on for these two. But I think taking out so much of the rejection feelings, the misinterpreting of why different things are happening, and then if they can start lowering their like sensory overload throughout the day, that these opportunities for intimacy will increase for them, even in terms of physical intimacy, but also in terms of emotional intimacy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Oh, that was a fascinating story. I wish we could dive more into it. As I've mentioned, I think intimacy is one huge big thing. Stephanie, are we happy with that? We will share the
Yep.
result to you, the slide, so then at least you can see what Stephanie has done with this couple onward. So thank you for sharing your lovely stories. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm just going to maybe mention to you, we are expanding our licensing part of our business, which is our new ecosystem, where we want to put more resources in there, because I think there was a question on, we, for instance, use the tree and then we overlay the scores of couples or teams or groups in that. Those are, for instance, some of the resources that we're going to start to put in our ecosystem. So I'm really at a quest for whatever I've collated over all the years, whatever I've used, it's actually going to be added into the ecosystem. So whatever you need to actually apply that with your clients, the resources, the tools, the handouts, the slides, the methods will be there for you to download, so that you don't need to go and think these things up by yourself. So that's really what we are aiming for. So Kaylee, are you okay that we share your bucket image? Are you happy with that? Thank you so much. So it's all about sharing. This is what our ecosystem is going to become, is how do we actually take people that has been through this training, how can we help you to implement it just so much faster? So just remember, our next webinar will be around sensory inclusive design. I just came back from a conference in Amsterdam, which was led by architects and designers, on how do we bring in the sensory inclusive piece into design. We are also working with an architect, and every single client that they are now building residential properties for first go through the sensory matrix, and we implement those changes or those suggestions into the architectural design. So there's a lot of fascinating work going on in that space. So feel free to join us on that one. And then the 3rd of November, we will be sharing our ecosystem, what it will look like. For those of you are really welcome to that. And then also, I will be mapping more case study webinars for 2027. If there's anything that you are interested in that you would love to know more about, please, please let us know, and we will definitely bring that into our topic and our schedule. We've trained more than 600 people all across the globe in the sensory intelligence framework and the use of the sensory matrix. So there is a wealth of information that I want our practitioners to share, and this will be the platform. And I'm still dedicated that we will write that up as a research article for us for publication. So sorry, there's no time for Q&A, and then I'm just leaving you. Good communication is the bridge between confusion and clarity, and I think that's definitely the overarching message around your sharing of your case studies. So it's really understanding who you are, sharing those needs, drop, labeling and judgment, and just be more kind and compassionate. So thanks for being there. Thank you, ladies, for sharing. Marianne, thank you for being in the background. Kaylee, Stephanie, Madre, thank you so much. Everyone who's been on the call, thanks. Have a lovely day further, or weekend further, or no, not weekend. I'm not weekend. Night further. And keep us posted. Take care. Cheers.